Today is Clean Up Australia Day. 20 years ago, you would have seen the kids out cleaning up our parks and waterways of plastic bags and litter. But as I drove into the studio this morning, not a soul to be seen. Obviously, today's kids are far too busy saving the planet from catastrophic climate change by wagging off school to actually have time to clean up the joint. But first, one of the best books I have ever read. Here it is, and indeed, one that has been extremely influential in my own thinking. And a book I urge everyone to read was written by an Australian, Chris Berg, in 2012. It was published by the Institute of Public Affairs, the Melbourne-based think tank brilliantly headed by John Roskam, which has given us some of the great thinkers and commentators of conservative opinion, many of whom you get to see regularly here on Outsiders, like Gideon Rosner, Bella Debrera, Jennifer Murahasi, and others. The book is called In Defence of Freedom of Speech. And I urge you to subscribe to the IPE if you do believe in free speech and are fed up with the snarling lynch mobs of social media who seek to attack and destroy the lives and reputations of anyone who steps out of line. At the heart of free speech is the concept, often attributed to Voltaire, superbly and elegantly articulated as, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Someone who was working at the IPA for several years, only a couple of doors down from Chris Berg while he was writing this terrific book, was Senator James Paterson, now a Liberal senator for Victoria and up until last week a great warrior for free speech in this country and a fearless opponent of the ghastly Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. I guess it must be something in the Canberra water or the rare air wafting through the parliamentary air conditioning. Or perhaps the real Senator James Paterson has been kidnapped and replaced with a lookalike. Either that, or last week, free speech in Australia suffered a body blow from which it may never recover. Now, I was deeply disturbed by Bettina Arndt's tweet 9 days ago, much like everyone else was, and I am not going to defend those comments. That is up to her to do. From my point of view, I do not believe that there is any justification or excuse whatsoever for the horrific, terrifying murders, evil murders committed by Rowan Baxter, and our prayers go out to the family of the victims. And like them, I condemn domestic violence in all its forms and long for the day it is a thing of the past. But then something else happened last Tuesday. The Senate decided to pass a motion condemning Bettina Arndt for those tweeted comments. The motion was moved by the Labor Party and it was supported by the Coalition. The Senate, in other words, were using the overwhelming power of government to crush one individual's reputation for expressing a point of view that they did not agree with, in complete violation of the fundamental principle of defending and protecting freedom of speech. Only 2 senators were courageous enough not only to stand up and call for a division so that we, the public, would get to know about this motion, but also brave enough to vote against the motion. Why do I say brave? Because they were voting to protect your right to free speech. The motion passed the Senate 55-2. One Nation senators Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts were the only ones brave enough to vote against it and stand up for you. That's right. When it came to the crunch of having to defend to the death a person's right to voice an opinion with which you profoundly disagree, the brave free speech warriors of the Liberal Party, including Senator Paterson and his cowardly cohorts, folded faster than a wonky deck chair on a Port Phillip pier in a southerly buster. But it gets worse. When we look at the key phrase about being driven too far, the one that shocked and disturbed me and so many others and caused such outrage, we learn that it wasn't in fact actually Bettina Arndt's phrase. In her original tweet, Bettina Arndt put quotation marks around the words "driven too far." She was quoting the police officer who was later stood down, and yes, she was quoting him approvingly, but she was nonetheless quoting someone else's official comment. And yet, and here's the rub, when the motion condemning Bettina Arndt went before the Senate, the quotation marks had disappeared. They'd been removed. That's right. The Senate condemned Bettina Arndt for a comment, the most offensive part of which were not her words. Am I being pedantic and picky like some English schoolteacher quibbling over a bit of dodgy grammar? You bet I am, because the removing of the quotation marks completely changes the authorship of who made that particularly outrageous comment. And on that note, as I say, I do not in any way support Bettina Arndt's or the police officer's original remarks, and I'm horrified by the way this whole thing has been politicised and the enormous damage it has done to both those individuals and the hurt to the family of the victims and of other victims of domestic violence. Furthermore, it is also important to point out that others have made similar remarks in the past. Indeed, back on May 5th in 2017, the ABC ran this headline and story: Cairns children killings. What drove Raina Thaide to slay 8 kids? In the community, she was known as a loving mother, but she reached a breaking point nobody saw coming. Are those comments in any meaningful way different from what Bettina Arndt and the police officer are now demonised and ostracised for? I don't recall the Senate moving a motion against the ABC, do you? Senator James Paterson also said, "I don't think people should be condemned by the Senate just for going against the grain or having views that are not consistent with the zeitgeist." But what she said last week went far, far beyond that. Except, Senator Paterson, she didn't say it. She was quoting someone else. You and your colleagues are hypocrites and cowards. Worse than that, you're lazy cowards who literally can't even be bothered dotting the I's and checking the punctuation marks in your rush to join the lynch mob. Even the left-leaning Economist magazine wrote this week, and I quote, that although it is not necessarily in companies' interests to allow the free expression of opinion, it is clearly in society's interests. Free speech, including by employees, is a cornerstone of democracy. I repeat, I do not support Bettina Arndt's comments, but I do defend her right to express them and for anyone else to express their opposition or horror at them. But Senator Paterson, and indeed every coalition senator, you have failed on a fundamental point of principle. Shame on you. Senators Malcolm Roberts and Pauline Hanson, you too can hold your heads up high.